All right, and we are recording. So welcome to Helen Project's Social Hour. I have the wonderful Sarah Nadel with me. She is the founder and executive director of Families to Freedom, an amazing organization here in Dallas that is helping with the major need for transportation for victims of abuse. So without further ado, we welcome her to this Social Hour. Sarah, thank you for being here. I would love to just start with you providing us some background information about Families to Freedom and what really sparked this interest for you to start the program.
Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to be here today to speak on this very important cause at the beginning of October, which is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So thank you very much for this platform. I began Families to Freedom. I began planning it and thinking about it in late 2014 after I discovered how many hundreds of victims and children every single day in our great state of Texas were being turned away from domestic violence shelters due to a lack of capacity. This is reported every year from the National Network to End Domestic Violence. They do an annual census of service providers to figure out where are the gaps. And every year they report every day, hundreds of victims and children continue, even now, to be turned away from shelters due to a lack of capacity. The Texas Council on Family Violence echoes those same findings that are released from the National Network to End Domestic Violence. Then I began talking to domestic violence shelter agencies around the North Texas area, and in particular the Dallas area, asking them, are you guys full? How do you handle it when it's busy? And they say, yeah, we're full a lot of the year, which then means that when a shelter is full, when there are no beds at Brighter Tomorrows, when there are no beds at Hope Store, when there are no empty beds at Genesis, that means that every single crisis caller that day, no matter how urgent her situation is, he chokes me, he has a gun in the house, my kids are being harmed by him. No matter what she says, if they have no bed, she has no place, they have no way to take her in. They can't do anything with that. To me, that's heartbreaking. And and just thinking and putting myself in the shoes of a caller who's saying, I'm in danger, my kids are in danger, and then having to be told over and over from each shelter, I'm sorry, we can't help you, we don't have any space for you. From the victim's perspective, she may view this as a sign that maybe I need to stay in the relationship and work it out. I can't get out because maybe this is a mistake to leave this guy. Or she may view it as a sign that it's not my time right now, or I've got to do something else drastic. There are smaller town shelters with empty beds that don't fill up to capacity at the rate that the bigger city shelters do. Right. And prior to Families to Freedom, most victims didn't even think about going to Decatur, Texas. They didn't even think about going to Greenville, Texas, or to Tyler, Texas, or to Sherman, Texas. So what we are doing is we are expanding a victim search for safety. If you need immediate safety and shelter and your domestic violence shelter in your town is full, let's get you to the next county or to the next city that does have an empty bed so you can be safe, so you can get counseling, you can start working through your legal steps, and figure out a way to be sustainably safe from those abusers. So taking that model meant that we had to provide a ride. We have to get in the car and drive to this other shelter. We had to know, who are the domestic violence shelters? Who do they help? And start pulling things together. Now that we're in our 5th year of service, we are helping, prior to the pandemic, we were averaging 550 victims and children every year that we were transporting to shelter or to family homes far away.
That's amazing. So tell me a little bit more. How did everything come together? Back in 2014, you had the vision. How did it, how did you get the transportation vehicles, and how have you seen even service provision change over the last 5 years?
I love this quote from Les Brown. I love so much of what Les Brown had done in the 80s and the 90s to inspire people, and I've watched many of his videos and speeches. And I'm going to probably misquote it. I'm going to paraphrase it, but it's something along the lines of, inch by inch, anything's a cinch. By the yard, it's hard. So if I had to come into the concept of Families to Freedom with, you know, trying to overthink it, having this massive, oh my God, there's going to be so much into it, I probably would have become overwhelmed. But I took the inch by inch approach. And what I did is I said, okay, today I can do research. Today I can learn what is parental kidnapping exactly. Today I can learn what are the different types of car seats that are needed, and why is a forward-facing, rear-facing, you know, cut off at this certain age and height and so forth. Today I can learn more about what is a bylaw, what are the governance papers that are needed for a nonprofit. Today I can learn about stalking. What are the numbers on stalking? Why is that so fatal? Why are women who were stalked more likely to be murdered? Let's dive into that. So every day I did something. Every single day I did something towards learning, building, growing. Every day was just a little bit more. Today I'm going to find insurance. And then another day, be like, okay, today we're going to work on the logo. Okay, today we're going to work on finding furniture, or, you know, finding an office space. So, you know, I didn't get overwhelmed with, oh my God, there's so much to do. We got to do this, we got to do that. Instead, it was like, okay, today I can do this. So let's do this. And I just kind of, like a little engine, just kind of just rolled with it. And here we are today. We've got volunteer team, more than 50 volunteer drivers. Not everybody's driving this year because of the pandemic.
Yeah.
But we have 50 volunteers have committed to be drivers on our team. We'll just put it like that. We have a handful of people that volunteer in other ways. We've got a part-time staff of 4 in our office. We've got an office that is much bigger than our previous. We were in a little tiny closet prior to our current space. It's been an evolution of change and growth, just little by little. And I think anybody who's starting out on a venture, whether that's you know, going out into college for the first time, or starting a business, starting a project, you know, you got to do a little bit at a time, and then build up and just be and accept that there's going to be changes, there's going to be evolutionary process, and just kind of roll with it.
That's amazing. And I think even too, when we're looking at community practice, so many social workers or social service agencies shy away from it because it is daunting. There's so much more in the works to it sometimes. So I really like that quote. How have you seen domestic violence, family violence change over the last 5 years? And how do you feel like Families to Freedom has had to adapt in light of that?
That is a really good question. There are some areas of domestic violence service. I'm going to talk about service, not so much the domestic violence itself. I'm assuming domestic abuse and domestic violence is more or less the same that it's always been. Verbal assaults in the home, physical altercations, threats, power control over each other. That has more or less maintained the same bad behaviors. But service providers, I think, have changed over 5 years. There's more discussion now about gun safety, specifically to protect victims. There's more discussion now about, let's bring in healthy relationship discussions into the public schools. We need to talk to students before they become adults, how to behave in a relationship, what to identify as signs of abuse so that I'm not doing it, or I'm not allowing somebody else to do that to me. So those are new discussions that are actually happening finally. 5 years ago, every shelter in the Dallas-Fort Worth area was completely siloed. They weren't sharing when they were at full capacity. They weren't really passing callers back and forth in order to help find an empty bed. Today, that is happening. As of late last year, there's a tool that several nonprofits, ours included, said, yeah, we need this. We need to know when Genesis is full so that I don't send callers to Genesis. If Genesis has no beds, it's a waste of a victim's time to call the hotline and ask for a bed. So now that we're sharing who has availability and who doesn't, if a victim calls in and says, I'm in danger, I need help, we can go through the list and go, okay, I'm not going to send her to here, I'm not going to send her to there. These 2 spots possibly have space for her. We're going to instead refer her or transfer that caller directly to a shelter that's most likely to be able to take her in. So that means the victims are able to get space and be accepted better than it was years ago before this new tool. And
Right.
advocates from multiple agencies now know that they can warm transfer, they can communicate a little bit more openly than they were in the past. That's been amazing. And now we're ramping it up again with transportation. Let's make sure that victims that are accepted have a way of getting there. We now need to hold shelters accountable and say, look, if you're going to provide sheltering and assistance and tell this lady, yes, we will take you in, you need to find a means to get her there. If you don't pay for the taxi cab or the Uber ride, then you need to lean on a charity to do that for you, whether that's Families to Freedom or Helen's Project or someone else. So I think service providers, we're collaborating more on the Dallas side. I haven't seen as much collaboration out of Fort Worth and Arlington yet. Maybe they're kind of holding back to see what works and what doesn't work before they jump in. I don't know. Same with Denton. Denton's Friends of the Family, an excellent shelter agency, wonderful people. I think they're holding back to kind of see what works and what doesn't work before they go into the fold of Dallas. But the Dallas shelters and the Collin County shelters seem to be collaborating more now than they were in the past. And it's so wonderful to see that. And this didn't exist 5 years ago. We're seeing domestic violence shelters that are an hour or more outside of the Dallas area collaborating with the Dallas shelters. So there's a little bit more of a network and collaboration that's a little bit larger than it used to be. And I think it's making it easier for victims to get the help they need.
Absolutely. And I think sometimes we don't always value collaboration the way that it's meant to be valued and utilized. And how do programs like Families to Freedom really partner and unify with shelters, with local law enforcement, with the judicial system, and going through legal processes with victims? So have you seen that shift as well over the last 5 years, where other entities are also coming alongside you and willing to partner and help victims?
Oh yeah. Every agency that we've interacted with, that I've interacted with, has said, we love what you do, here's what we do. And I look at their services and go, oh, I love this. We can't sit with a person in her living room and give her legal guidance. We can't walk somebody through the housing process. I'm so glad that you are a transitional housing option. I am so glad you guys do free legal service. I'm so glad you guys can do counseling and trauma therapy, because we can't do that out of our agency. So yes, sharing resources, leaning on, one agency leaning on the other makes each agency even better, makes us be able to better serve those that we're calling. And
absolutely.
Yeah, and it makes the whole community that much stronger and better. So
right, absolutely.
Now here's a tackle that I've really wanted to reach out to sheriff's departments. I started in the beginning of 2020, reaching out to sheriff's departments, educating the sheriff deputies about family violence, make sure that they know, hey, they're a resource. Hey, there are other counties and we can help with that.
Right.
Some sheriff's departments deputies are familiar with family violence. They take it seriously. They have the right words in their toolbox of what to say and how to respond. Others still need a little bit more help with educating. So my goal in 2020 was to reach out to more sheriff's deputies and sheriffs themselves and just sort of bring up the topic. And then the pandemic happened, and so that's going to have to wait till next year.
Right.
It's one thing for a police department who's, going to the homes talking about family violence and having those domestic dispute calls. It's another thing for sheriff's department where you get into the more rural areas and people who are on highways. In your sheriff's department, people are more likely to interact with sex trafficking type of situations. So that's where my focus has been, is making sure that sheriff's departments are aware of the resources so that they can handle family violence situations when they come up.
Absolutely. And I think just making sure everyone has this trauma-informed approach where we understand it, regardless of if our approach is different, that we just know that, okay, I'm maybe walking into a situation where there's, high anxiety, high emotions, lots of trauma going on. How can we all effectively combat that and work with these
Right.
clients? So what would you say are some of the positive things you're noticing besides what you've already mentioned? And then what are still gaps and barriers for victims, for programs like Families to Freedom, Helen's Project, all our other partners? What does that look like right now, especially in 2020?
I'm going to start with the gaps and barriers. There's a barrier for housing. We are having a really hard time finding places for survivors to live at after their time at shelter. So shelter, just as a reminder to anybody watching this who is unfamiliar, a domestic violence shelter is totally not like a homeless shelter. If you've ever watched like a Dateline or 2020 or a 60-minute segment about homeless shelters or homeless problems, that's not a domestic violence shelter. You're not going to have the soup kitchen cafeteria. You're not going to have the 3 or 4 bunk beds in a very large room. That's not a domestic violence shelter. These are sometimes homes. These are sometimes converted business facilities. Sometimes it's a bedroom. Sometimes it's like a dorm style. It's very cozy. But it's all temporary. So you've got maybe a month, 2 months. If you're real lucky and you got a good agency, maybe 3 months in that shelter. And then what? Some victims and survivors have more legal problems. They have a stalker that they have to think about. Maybe they need to change their identity. Maybe they need to press charges or go through divorce proceedings, but that takes longer than expected. Or maybe there's a protective order and then he continues to contact her, so she now has to go down the route of, oh, hey, he's still harassing me and stalking me and bothering me even though I've got an order, so now she has to pursue that. That can all take more time than what a shelter has to offer. And there's just not enough housing right now, in part from the pandemic, also in part because our economy just is not as good as it could be.
Right.
I wish it was. There's just, and the Dallas area is so expensive. It's so expensive to live here, but that's where the jobs are. So, that's a real struggle. Anyway, we need more housing. We need more cheap vehicles. We get callers who are looking for a means to get around town. They need to take their kids to appointments, to school, and so forth. They've fled from a domestic abuser and they don't have a means to get around town. And it's expensive to take an Uber everywhere you need to go. It's just not a sustainable model for somebody who has almost no income. So definitely more of an infrastructure and transportation is needed. Housing is needed. Legal is needed. We need more legal advocacy for survivors. So there are plenty of gaps. There are plenty of gaps that still need to be filled in. As far as what's working well, I think what's working well is that we are still talking about domestic violence, that our nation and our society is still taking this matter seriously. We are valuing women now more than we probably have in the last 15, 20 years. The Me Too movement was one thing, and now we're re-examining, to how much authority do we have over our own body and over our own families. We have the right to say, yes, I want my family to be like this. Yes, I want to be able to work and I need to be able to earn an income. So we're treating women a little bit more equitably now, and I love that, and I hope that trend stays and grows over time. And that's something I think is working well. And just talking about over social media, there's so many ideas that come out over social media, people telling their stories that they never could have told way before social media ever existed. You might have felt like you were alone in your situation and why is this happening to me? But when you get on social media and you see other survivors tell their stories, you realize, okay, I'm not alone. There is a way out. She survived this. I know I can do this too. And it's very encouraging for survivors to be able to see that they can recover.
Absolutely. So good. What would you say, what is the future of domestic violence intervention look like? What is your ideal vision of programs and how we can make more of an impact as a community?
Ooh, I love this question. It's probably the first time I've been asked about, intervention and prevention.
Right.
The future. I'm really hopeful that getting into the classrooms earlier than college. I'm really hopeful that lends towards preventing family violence and domestic violence in the future. And I'm talking like middle school, high school kids understanding what does abuse look like? What does respect in a relationship look like? Having that discussion, and it's more than just sex ed, which I don't know, some schools do sex ed, some don't. There's a lot of debate on
but
whether
they should, shouldn't they?
But I think it's relationship ed is what's really needed, regardless of one's opinion on having sex education in schools or not. Relationship education is definitely needed, and I don't think it should be an elective. I think every student needs to have a discussion on how do you manage relationships in a respectful, lawful, loving, caring way,
Right.
even if they have their own issues. Maybe a student is going to become more and more bipolar. Maybe a student is going to become more and more damaged from whatever trauma they're experiencing at home, but at least they're educated on what is supposed to be caring, respectful, and equitable in a relationship.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Where do you see Families to Freedom in the future too? What are some of your goals and dreams and hopes?
I want us to be everywhere.
Yeah.
We are looking at, we haven't done anything yet, don't get the word out too soon, but I hope that in the next 15-20 years that we can have offices in other cities across Texas so that we can help all of the survivors and victims out of Texas get a ride to a shelter, get a ride to family far away. I would love it if in 20-30 years that we are beyond Texas, that Families to Freedom has offices in other states that need to help their victims get to shelters or help their victims and survivors get to family far away. We can reduce homelessness, we can reduce child abuse, we can reduce disappearances, or we can reduce murders, all those things if we can help victims get far away from their abuser. And we can't just limit that to Texas because we're only one state. So we got to be looking at how can we take what's working well here in North Texas and bring that to other states and other regions. So that's what I'm hopeful for in our future. It all starts today with discussions like this, where we figure out what's working and getting the word out to the communities to say, hey, we need to. If you're watching this video and you're not yet wholly involved in Helen's project, if you're not involved in some sort of domestic violence agency, if you're not talking about it, this is your calling. You've got to step up and start talking. You got to start working, get involved, do something with your time on this earth to help others. And in my opinion, help women and children because they are our future, in my opinion.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. Now, my last question is, what is the best way for service providers to get in contact with Families to Freedom? What does the process for victims look like? Just share that with us.
Thank you for that. Yes. So the process for a new survivor is to call into our hotline. Our number is 972-885-7020. We'll have a discussion about where you are in your journey as a new survivor or victim. Some people don't identify as victims, they want to identify as survivors, and vice versa.
Right.
We'll have a discussion about where are you in your process? Where do you need to be? What's the risk that you face? And what all do you need to take with you? Then we'll start working through a long-term solution. We're going to think about emergency shelter, but we're also thinking, okay, once you get to shelter, then what? Do you have any family? Do you have any friends? Do you need housing? What do you want to do? So we'll go ahead and start looking at helping her think through long-term solutions. It might be a car ride to get to shelter, or it might be a Greyhound ticket to get to family in another state. We'll figure out what works best for that particular caller. So that all starts by calling in and having a phone discussion with us. For service providers, certainly they can call in and ask any question they want.
Right.
We also have a website. Our website is loaded with information. Unlike a lot of agencies that keep a lot of their criteria secret, We put it all out there. If you want to know how can I qualify for services, it is on our website. We've got it even bullet pointed and listed out. And that's at families2freedom.org. Families with an IESTO freedom.org. Service providers can certainly go through our website, see what meets criteria, what do we do, what do we not do, so that they can have a meaningful, productive conversation with their new survivor about, here's an option if you want to go to your mom's in Minnesota. Here's an agency that can help you with that, or here's another option. You can go down the legal route and get an apartment here, and or here's another option. So service providers, I would definitely recommend check out our website, figure out what we do, what we don't do, so that way you can have discussions with your survivors.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sarah, for your time and just sharing about Families to Freedom. It is such an important role that you play in this community, and Helen's Project is lucky to be a partner with you. So thank you again for your time. I so appreciate it.
And I really appreciate, I am so glad to meet everybody at Helen's Project. I am so glad to find a sister partner that can help us all work together, make ourselves better and stronger for the victims that need us. So yay, all around.
Yes, thank you so much.